The good thing about doing these so early in the morning is that everybody at Substack is still asleep.
Yeah, all my bosses are asleep still.
Yeah,
And they
so
have no idea.
you can speak with complete impunity. They'll never find out. You can tell
Yeah.
us the honest truth about everything.
Great.
All the things you want to get off your chest, this is the chance.
Perfect.
I'm not sure you guys know one another. Um, Simon K. Jones, he writes Write More with Simon K. Jones, and he has another Substack for his fiction called the Triverse series. Um, I really click with him because he shares that similar fascination with the technical side of things. And you can see that in his Write More with Simon K. Jones, where he's written a lot of how-to manuals about how to do different things in Substack. Ben Cohen is a developer at Substack. I'm not sure your exact title, but he's responsible for the categories that they've added across the top. That's his biggest claim to fame. I'm sure there's more that you do than that, but that's the thing that I know about you. Um, do you work more with Chris or Jay Raj?
Um, I bounce around. I've got sort of a weird pinch hitty role where, as projects need more people, I sometimes join them. So, I've bounced around good bits of the product, but Jay and I have worked pretty closely together for the last 6 months on algorithmy stuff. But like the last couple weeks, I've been doing something totally different in the background. I've worked some on our search stuff, which yes, we know is bad, but would love to improve. But yeah, all around.
Okay. Well, we've got a crew in here now watching us. I wanted to start off by talking about leaderboards, but not the leaderboards that you guys are probably thinking of. I want to talk about the secret leaderboards that are maintained by the users for their favorite Substack employees. Because over the past year, you introduced the categories, which I've been whining about hashtags forever. So that made you go up in the ranks for me. And then also, you did several things that seemed like you were trying to goose your standing in those boards, where you asked people, you told people to give you random categories that they wanted to have added to their profile. And there was another time when you asked people for crazy things just to see how well it was categorizing stuff. Were those deliberate strategic moves on your part to try to unseat Mills in the number one spot?
No, I think should Mills deserves the number one if he doesn't have it now. Those were actually, especially the category one, very non-altruistic. I needed data to test things, and that seemed like an easier way than me coming up with it myself, and also just a way to have a lot of fun.
Okay. Well, Mills is number one for most people, but it is kind of bifurcated based off of gender. Um, Whenever you look at it broken down with the male and female, a lot of the women, Hamish McKenzie is number one because he just speaks with that
It's the accent,
New
yeah.
Zealand accent and, you know, just like talk Kiwi to me or whatever. But I did want to ask you, and I know that Simon has some questions about the algorithm as well, about what exactly or how it controls visibility. Um,
Yeah,
so,
are you talking about who sees which tabs?
yeah. So, what metrics beyond engagement and subscription status have a bearing on that?
Yeah,
Because,
that's something that's pretty incomplete right now, and it's something that I would love to come back to, and it's probably on my January or February hit list. Um, but the big problem we like the kind of biggest issue we had after we solved the problem of like making the content in there relevant is like Substack had previously had a pretty limited scope of categories, and this wasn't because we didn't want other categories or didn't care about those other categories. It's just that like we had not necessarily thought of the um, like what all of the ones should be, and having this like hierarchy of categories, we have to like maintain that forever. We can't tell people actually your category is going away because it got restructured into this other thing. That causes a lot of chaos. There's like SEO implications for like getting rid of those leaderboards. So we kind of expanded out the categories, and what we have not yet cracked is like how people can opt in or out of these. I think behind the scenes now we probably have, I want to say it's like 150-ish of these categories, and while it sounds really good to say, here's a page with 150 options, check or uncheck the boxes that you do or don't want, for a lot of users, like that, you can't show someone that screen when they download your app and expect them to ever get past it. So the way it works now is that and I think this was dynamic for a while, and I think it's now just gets reevaluated much less frequently, but we, based on like what you um, do or don't like in notes, we have a model behind the scenes that says like, given this note, do we think you're going to like it? So if it's a nice picture of someone you know's dog, that's going to be pretty high up there. If it's political rhetoric from someone you hate, it's probably going to be pretty low. So what we do is basically periodically we'll say, what are the things that are in these tabs? So like, what is the actual notes that are in there right now? And then how does your ranking of them compare to the average? So if, I'm a big baseball fan and I don't really care about any other sports. So if you're like running this on opening day in baseball season and all of the notes in the sports section are going to be really good for me, that will kind of bump that up. And if there's a tab where it says, Ben's not going to really like any of these notes, that will sort of bump that down the list. I will say that's the sort of tiebreaker factor to keep things interesting. The kind of the main way of what you show and what the order is just what you've told us. So your subscriptions and what categories they're in, you can go, it's sort of hidden in the app right now, but there is a way to go specify for like the top level categories, sports versus business versus politics, for you to like indicate interest or disinterest in them. And then we have this little tiebreaker of like what's there now as a way to keep it a little bit dynamic.
Okay. Simon, you have questions?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I find amazing is that you come onto a chat with a couple of users to talk about this kind of nerdy detail. I think that's really interesting because so many of the other platforms that we've had for like the last, I don't know, 20 years or something, they're just black boxes and no one has any idea what's going on or what the thought process is. And then maybe something crazy happens and then some communications person tries to retroactively justify it or whatever, whereas you guys are kind of very public and openly kind of tinkering and talking about why you're doing it. And yeah, I find that is that like where does that come from, that attitude? Does that come from the top, or because it just seems really unusual to be that transparent about stuff?
Yeah, I think it comes from a few reasons. One, it definitely comes from the top somewhat. Chris, Hamish, and Jay are all really excited about these things, and I think like our employees just self-select for people who want to talk about these things. Second of all, this one specifically, I'm very happy to talk about because it was maybe the problem that I was stuck on for the longest. I had this like many week iteration cycle of I had 15 employees that were kind of in this group chat on Slack, and I would basically say, all right, I cracked the case this time because like my tabs that you picked for me look great. And then I would send it out and this person would be like, well, my number one is TV and I have, I don't own a TV, go back to the drawing board. And like, that one took me a long time to crack. I think and this is like I think we're proud of these things. Like I think, a lot of places again have this like metric of just engagement in viewing ads. And like, I don't think a lot of people are proud of that, but like, I'm very happy that people are using these to discover writers and pay. And I think the incentive structures are good and healthy and don't have to hide behind a press team, hopefully, to talk about them.
Yeah, no, I mean, it works. I mean, I think I said before that, particularly like in the last couple of years, I think Mills being so vocal about some of the design decisions or if something wasn't working, a lot of that actually produces, rather than it being a kind of chaotic element, which I guess you could imagine managers being like, no, don't talk about that. Actually, for someone who uses the platform a lot, having those discussions helps because it gives a certain reassurance that the people behind the scenes are A, know what they're doing, and B, are thinking about the things that we're all thinking about, and you might not have the answers just yet, but the fact that you're asking the right questions is really, really reassuring.
Yeah, Mills is great for this. Mills like just has everyone's perspective, and I assure you that like that helps us. In meetings, Mills will reference people. Things people are telling to him on notes and in DMs, and like what our users are thinking about, and that perspective for us is really helpful.
Yeah. But the communication really does engender a lot of trust as well. In fact, I wonder, it would be interesting to see the people who complain about Substacks, some strategic move they're making, and whether those people are following the individuals who communicate this type of information. Because if you exist in a vacuum, then it is easy to, impugn nefarious motives, and there's some secret agenda that they're really going to do this horrible thing. But compared to if you've read the day by day, or
Yeah.
as they make announcements, So
Yeah, I think two things are true. One is that all of these things are less dramatic, and like people kind of overly read into a lot of them. Like I know this, we've been talking a lot about internally, and now like we have a TikTok prize out for a lot of people to come to TikTok, and like I think there's a lot of people who are like, Substack's going to turn into an only video platform, and I don't think we have any intents on that. I think it's just like there are more great people out there, and we want them here. But I also think that like, despite the fact that it's sometimes frustrating to see like things that I know are in good faith people complaining about, like it is definitely healthy skepticism, right? Like it's useful for us to refine our thinking based on that. So it's not all bad. Even if sometimes I'm like, damn, I know this is for a great reason, and like people are skeptical, but I think that's good. It means they care.
Yeah, and I think we've all been slightly trained over the last decade to not trust tech platforms, right? And tech companies, which is not necessarily like any of your fault, but there's a history of weird decisions or kind of anti-user decisions. So I think that skepticism is probably well founded, but I think the thing that's weird or startling or unusual is the transparency that you guys have, where I think because you're trying to do your own kind of PR and explaining what Substack is, but you're also almost having to react against this legacy of a slightly checkered past from tech platforms.
Yeah, I think the people involved are pretty good at that line. Thankfully, my job lets me disappear into the shadows of being just another engineer when needed, so I don't have to deal with like the real tough calls. But no, I at least like the approach that we've taken.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any kind of safeguards in place to prevent people from creating like echo chambers, or is that even a concern?
Yeah, I think go for it.
I was going to say, because typically newsletters attract a certain people who share the same interests. But recently, you'll see notes from people that you're not already following. But for me, when I see those notes from some person I've never heard of before, a lot of times it's about a topic that I'm already interested in, and I do want to see that. Does that play into trying to avoid creating an echo chamber, or is that, like I said, is that even something you guys are concerned about?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that we are concerned about from a perspective of, everyone has their own views of like if that is good or bad for the internet. I probably don't have the complete answer here, but I think we're a little bit more focused on trying to like give you the keys to like let you control kind of what level of, let's call it, exploration that you are seeing. The simplest way to consume Substack is you're off of like, you don't even know notes exist. You don't use any of the features. There are many Substack users out there whose entire interaction with the platform is this person I like emails me once a week, and there's a little footer at the bottom that says like powered by Substack, and like that's kind of all I know. So to the extent like we have no desire to force those people out of their echo chamber for whatever they're reading, because that's not our place, like they have not come to our platform for that. I think what we are focused on is when you are looking to find something outside of your bubble and explore your ideas, giving you like the right tooling to do that in a healthy way. So like no, even on notes, for an example, like you can look at only your following feed, which is kind of code for, hey, I'm not trying to explore right now. And you could not try to explore right now because like there's many reasons. You could not want to be exposed to their political side. You could just only have 2 minutes and want to catch up from people you love. You could be perfectly dialed and have the right cake recipe creators and never want to see a pie recipe, right? There's all these reasons. But like, I think what we're focused on is when you do want to explore and branch out, how do we do that in a reasonable way?
Yeah, I think I saw something from, I think it was Mills that posted it, but I don't know if it was something he'd originally come up with or whether he was quoting someone else, but he was talking about kind of like a vision of the internet, I suppose, rather than it being like the massive town hall that certain other people go on about. Instead, it's the idea of lots of much smaller rooms, but with better doors and windows, which I really liked. I kind of latched onto that as a like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense.
That's interesting.
That kind of fixes a lot of the things the problems I've had with kind of online communities in the last sort of decade and a half or something, where I think humans go a bit strange when the scale of things gets too big. So actually having the smaller spaces where people maybe have a bit more in common, but not on a kind of mass mob-like level, but it's also still really easy to just hop into a different room or go and have a look somewhere else. That seems like a nice balance.
Yeah, I think that chat is kind of our sleeper feature that's really good at that. I think, this is probably also something I'm lifting from Mills without realizing it, but like, I think it's amazing how much benefit you get from having some level of connection, camaraderie, not even like non-anonymity, but like seeing the same people, even if they are anonymous. Like, you think of Twitter where it's very easy to come across someone that you've never seen before and be like, oh, gotta end that person's career, right? Like just there's like no connection there. But like when you enter a Substack chat, like there's a number of chats that I'm active in that are like really good, insightful takes on like conversations on hard topics. And they're not dunks, they're paragraphs long, they're thought out. And these are not people who know each other, but these are people who have the common factor of like, hey, we both like the same thing. Here's kind of a shared start. And even if I don't know you or know who you are, I recognize that your picture is coming up and we've talked before, we've built up a little bit of good faith. And it's interesting because like in other communities, I think you have status markers to indicate this. Like, I'm thinking of a Twitter check or a Reddit, look how old this person's account is or how much karma they have. And I think we don't have those, but like manage to have this really healthy spaces. And I think you're totally right that it's these, you choose to enter the space, which makes a big difference. And then it is not like a completely contained environment, but there are some boundaries and like commonalities for people.
Yeah, that's chat is one of those things where I don't know, I just haven't gotten into the habit of using it. And I don't know if you see my posts where I'm asking for like a unified stream, just so put everything all in one place. That's entirely selfish on my part. I just want to make it easy for me. But you are right that chat is such a powerful tool. I've seen communities and places where they use it very well, and so much activity and people coming back week after week, and it's such a great feature if you can leverage it well. Let me ask you, how do you guys approach surfacing content from new people or people who are focused on a very niche topic? Because you don't see it as much anymore, but in the early days of Notes, people would always complain that, this with thousands of subscribers, they're the ones getting all the visibility. Nobody's ever going to see my stuff. And we had a rash of new people join who were saying that they're just shouting into the void. But I don't think that that's necessarily true because people were seeing those posts. It's just they weren't writing anything that someone could engage with.
Yeah. So The people who join with like tons of followers, like one of our best-selling writers, when they join, they're always going to have um, some sort of advantage for the reason that the platform works at all, right? Like people are already following them, and it is a good experience both for the people posting and the people consuming. That like if you follow someone, you want to see their stuff. So like they get a built-in audience, not because we're promoting them because they're giant. It's because like they get a built-in audience because they start with an audience. New users is really hard to do, and I don't think like I think there's like a natural exploration while the algorithm figures out who they are. So one of the um, ways that our algorithm and virtually every other algorithm works is that like it knows your relationship with somebody else, and it will, based on that, uh, boost or harm their content. So, like, even if I'm not following you, if I've liked 50 of your notes before, it's more likely to show me something because, like, it implicitly knows a little bit that I like your content. When someone joins the platform, we don't have those relationships at all. So we don't know. We have like a sense of what they're talking about. So there's a little bit of an exploration for again. This looks like a baseball note. I'm going to show it to Ben because he likes everyone's baseball notes. He's a sucker for those things, but we don't have information. So I think like the actual experience of a new person, and we periodically do this, like Substack employees will go and just say like, hey, I'm going to use a new account for a couple of days just to like see what my feed looks like. In fact, one of the tools that I built and really love is actually it probably came in 15 minutes ago. Every Monday morning, I get it creates like an example fake new user, and I get a screenshot of what their feed would look like. And I call it my weekly empathy email for just me to say like, hey, what are new users seeing? Making sure that it's like, even if not the highest quality content, stuff that's like not objectionable, stuff that lets them explore, etc. So I think that like what people are seeing is probably that the algorithm is just like exploring who they are, and they might I think that's like the reason why it'll feel like 0, 0, 0, 25 interactions, because like the we kind of have to make a lot of guesses, and sometimes those guesses are easy to make. Like if the user joins and they haven't posted before, but they've like read a lot of Substack or liked a lot of stuff, we might have some notion of that. But a lot of the experience is probably just like luck in terms of how the exploration goes.
So my experience is so finely tailored to my interests, and I was on Substack for a couple of years before Notes started, which presumably helped. But like for me, I've always said from the very start that Notes is a bit like going along to like a local writing fiction writers group. It's like going to the pub or in someone's front room and just having a chat about books and writing and that kind of thing. And it's kind of remained that with more people showing up, but that's still the vibe that I get. But presumably, other people, their entire feed is like finance stuff or AI or or tech or
Yeah.
sport, and I don't see any of that. And that kind of these kind of like subculture strands that you end up in, I find really fascinating because it makes it hard to kind of know what Substack is as a cultural entity, I suppose. Whereas I feel like when I used to be on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, which I don't really bother with these days, but although there was a lot of algorithmic stuff going on, I kind of felt like I knew what that space was like, I suppose. And
Yeah.
Substack just feels like it's so amorphous. Like certainly for me, is a great way. Like I love what I end up seeing, but yeah, I don't know how you deal with new users where you don't know what they're up to.
Yeah, I think the other thing where it might feel harder is probably that like if I had to guess here, new users probably are encountering a lot of like other new users. Like the algorithm is probably saying like you're an amorphous person who we don't know where to put you yet. So like all these other people are like you, but they also kind of haven't, I'll call it, haven't been sorted yet. But actually the problem you're describing is one of the hardest things to deal with when I work is like working here is like my Substack experience is so well dialed towards the kinds of things that I consume that like it's very hard for me when I'm making changes that are outside of that experience to even like understand them. Like again, we've been talking about video a lot recently, and like I'm just not a video consumption person. Just doesn't fit my workflow, and like I see maybe one video a day in my Substack feed, and then everyone's like, oh, I come to Substack like primarily as a video platform, and like I have to now do a job to support those people, but it's like very different from how I use the platform. And like even as far as like types their categories of content go, like I don't do a ton of political stuff on my Substack, and people say like, oh, the political discussion here is either good or bad, but like for me it's, oh, like I'm talking about baseball and books and jokes, and like I just don't see a lot of that stuff.
You mentioned how the algorithm will throw things at a new user, trying to get a feel for what they like and what they don't. Um, what are the signals that the user can send to the algorithm saying, hey, I'm not interested in this, just ignore those posts, or
Yeah,
is there something else?
it's good and bad here. We're not doing all of the scary things of how long your eyeballs are on this. Like, it's, do you like the content? That's a good signal. Do you subscribe to the writer? That's a great signal. And do you hide it? That's a bad signal. I think those are either the three primary or maybe the only three things we look at. But basically, the algorithm is tuned for like the thing that, you subscribing to a writer or free signing up, and then like paying money is obviously the highest signal. And we use free signups as like a proxy for that, just because the paying obviously takes a lot more time. People are more willing to sign up, but those are the three things you can do. So there's, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, there aren't subtle ways to nod it this way or another. It's like, give us the thumbs up or a thumbs down, and we'll try to figure out the rest.
So basically, they just need to actually use the platform and start liking posts and resharing and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely a chicken and egg problem where like you need to use the platform to make it good, but it's kind of more difficult to use. I think one of the things we try to do is like for users first like day or week, we actually I think like don't use like we try to hack the algorithm in a way to get it to like spread out. So we want to make sure you're seeing like a variety of stuff. So, like we don't want, if you come in like 5 politics things, we don't necessarily want to start only showing you politics stuff immediately. We want to make sure that like you've seen sports, you've seen fiction, you've seen business, and like give you the opportunity to like or not like those. Then once we've gotten, enough stuff to say, hey, you probably only like this, we can say, all right, take the training wheels off and work with those signals.
That's interesting because, yeah, it feels like a lot of algorithmic stuff over the years has been so basic that if you show like even the slightest interest in a thing, it then assumes that it's your main hobby and you're an enthusiast. Yeah. Like you buy a replacement toilet seat from Amazon and they're like, would you like these other 20 ones? These are great.
Yeah,
like,
that's all the ads you get for...
Something I was wondering, so on my newsletter, I have a mix of fiction and non-fiction. So I publish my own fiction, but then I also put out a kind of a journal about writing, I suppose, with writing tips and that kind of stuff. But it's really hard from a category perspective, the way it's interfaced at the moment, to kind of represent that. So as far as some of the Substack UX is concerned, I suppose, it has no distinction between whether I'm putting out fiction or non-fiction. And presumably this is a big part of why if you go to like the fiction category, it's mostly not fiction. I'm just wondering if there's how much chatter there has been about that and what could be done.
So a few things are at play there. I think the first is, and those are kind of separate things. I think that like categories matter. Like the way I think of categories is like they are useful for leaderboards. Like basically we give all of our writers like a way to specify here's what game I'm competing in. To the extent they care about leaderboards. And I think they're useful for that. And they're useful for like a first order approximation of like what something is about. That said, on like the discovery surfaces and when figuring out like where to surface stuff, I think those are guiding factors much more than they are kind of deciding things. So like things are a little bit more advanced than I have indicated that I like fiction. You have specified that your thing is fiction. I'm going to show it to you. We try to make some guesses about what the piece is about. So again, if you're writing historical fiction, we might show that to someone who's interested in history because we know. The other problem you're describing is a big problem for me specifically, but it's just that like determining fiction is hard, and humor is the other category where we really struggle here. The models are very good about like and it's very easy to say, here's when this thing is about basketball. Like, turns out you can approximate that to the first 2 degrees by saying, like, do you mention the word hoop or net or dribbling or like, 3-pointer, right? Like, I can come up with a set of rules in 5 minutes. They're going to be 90% accurate if something's about basketball. Doing that in fiction is very hard. Telling a fictional short story apart from a nonfiction short story is something that like I probably can't do as a fairly literate human. So I think that's when those things break down a little bit, and like the unsatisfying answer there is maybe that just we're going to get better with those over time. And with fiction, I think specifically in humor, those actually might be categories where we do trust the not really trust your category association a little bit more, because it's very hard to figure out when people are part of that, for the same reason that it's hard for a human to figure that out.
Yep. Simon, you stole my question. That was actually the very next thing I was going to ask. But,
Sorry.
It's okay. Ben, you kind of touched on this, but I'd like for you to expand on it a bit more. You mentioned how that for humor, you lean more onto the user has indicated that this is the type of stuff they post. How do you guys handle confidence thresholds? Because, it seems like you're using machine learning to determine what type of content it is, but all this stuff that you've mentioned, with fiction, humor, things that are really subjective, how do you handle situations like that? Or is it something you're just still figuring out?
Definitely still figuring out, but there's a few attempts so far. The first is that like we trust the user first and foremost. Like, the incentive structure is not there for you to like lie about what your category is. It's just gonna like, if I put my politics piece tagged as fiction because I think it will go farther, turns out that people who are interested in fiction are not gonna like that. So like, to the extent that we have your data, we just trust it because the incentives are aligned there. The second is that I think we do have like slightly higher confidence thresholds for the categories where it's ambiguous. So like fiction, humor, and there's a third one that always gives us trouble who's escaping me here. But we do have like a little bit of a higher bar for us assigning that. And then 3 is like, I think it's okay for us to be ambiguous and not necessarily like assign a category to everything. I mean, there are, I'm sure, pieces that get published that just don't line up with any of the categories that we have. A really big one, and if any of you guys are listening, I'm always thinking of you, and I have not forgotten, but like we've got a really big genealogy contingent on Substack that really likes talking about that. And as far as I know, that like doesn't fit into like, it's not history exactly, it's not science exactly. So like there are things that get published that are just like outside of the categories we know about. And I think we'll eventually get better and like have those, but there are people publishing also just like new stuff, like whatever the next crypto is, does not have, like, crypto might have a category, but like whatever the next hot tech thing is, like, doesn't have a category. So I think it's also, we realize that it's okay for things like not to necessarily fit into this model immediately, because people are, turns out there's more than like 170 types of content or whatever the number is out there. So not everything has to like have a tag per se. One of the nice things about the way these algorithms work is they don't rely on like these discrete tags. Like, they don't rely on me tagging this basketball and you liking basketball. It can get this like squishy score for, this is kind of in your neighborhood of things that you'd like, even if we don't have a name for it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess the moment you start trying to define categories in a sort of canonical way, like, it's always going to be reductive, isn't it? You're either going to end up with like 1,000 of them, or it's going to be so reductive that you just miss out loads of things. So yeah, it's interesting. Like, is it increasingly that kind of fuzzy edged thing is actually more useful?
Yeah, it depends what we're doing. I think like a hard category is useful for a leaderboard. What I'll call like a soft category assignment is really good for these category tabs where like you need to be approximately relevant. But I'm sure if you go in there right now, there are examples you can find where it's like, I guess, like, I see why it's a lot of, I see why this is here, but I wouldn't put this here, maybe. And then there's like this third where having a category doesn't do anything, of like, if I show you this on your notes feed and you like it, that is a useful assignment independent of whether I showed that to you because I thought it was of this interest or that interest, or because it's just somebody you like. So like depending on where you are, you may or may not need categories at all.
Okay. It would be interesting, just from a curiosity point of view, to see like an uncategorized label, and everything that the algorithm doesn't understand just gets lumped in there.
Yeah. I don't have a good sense of like what percentage of our stuff we can categorize. Like of the like posts are obviously easier. Posts are just longer and you have more data. But I have no intuitive sense for if we can categorize 5% or 95% or somewhere in between. So I should know that. But I don't like I mostly don't think in categories. Like I mostly think in just the like affinity is what I'll call it.
Yeah. Just having no ads on the platform and not having to optimize for advertisers in the traditional sense, like, does that make your job easier or more interesting? I'm just curious because it must be like the kind of role that you have at Substack is presumably has quite a different feel to if you were doing essentially the same role at Meta, for example.
Yeah, so it makes it probably easier in some senses, harder in others. I think one of the ways that it makes it easier is like there are never conflicting priorities. Like it's never a question of like, can we like do we put this here, but that like bumps the ad down the screen. It's like we can't put that there. Like that is not something we have to worry about. I think the way I think of it is that we are thinking on a longer time scale than an ad driven thing where like it is unlikely for you to see someone's note whatever it is and like start paying them immediately, right? Like that's we would love that to happen, but it like is like the mental model we have for that is much more like you see their note, that's cool, you start reading their stuff, you like it, and then you start paying them like eventually. But that's a really like a much longer time scale than the advertising is literally just like zero 0.4 seconds on this page is worse than 0 0.5 seconds on this page. So I think it like it's a little bit more difficult that way. But other than that, it's probably fairly similar in that, you know, we have models and those models are trained to maximize people paying for Substacks and people reading Substacks. They have models, those models are trained for people clicking on ads, but like I don't know. I've actually never done this type of work elsewhere. So like I don't really have a good sense of how that would be different, but that's my approximation of an answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's start wrapping things up. I've got a question here from BLV_40, and it seems like she's asking if notes are available to everyone or only content creators.
Oh, notes are available to everybody.
Yeah, it's available to everyone. You can log in right now. And then Sophia wanted to shout out to you, saying that.
Hi, Sophia.
But all right, Simon or Ben, do you have anything else that you'd like to say? Or...
For my part, no, I mean, it's fascinating stuff. And like I say, I think the big thing for me is just the fact that you guys at the company are interested in having these conversations and having them publicly as well. I think for a lot of us, because we're investing, you know, as writers or creators more generally, so much time into building things using Substack's set of tools, and having been burned many times in the past on other platforms, like there's that inherent risk, obviously, which there always is when you're using someone else's tools, I suppose. But the fact that you are talking about your motivations and thoughts and design processes is massively reassuring. You know, whether we always agree or like the answers, just the fact that the conversation is there is really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think I appreciate that. Like it's fun, you know. I think I do this kind of work because like it's interesting to me, so I like the opportunity to kind of talk about it, especially like the opportunity to talk about it kind of in this vacuum outside of my day to day of like actively thinking about it. You know, I just like talking about it at the abstract level of what makes these things good, and you know, I'm always come away from them with like ideas on the object level, day to day stuff.
Okay, Anthony Lee Phillips, he just joined as we were closing up. Anthony, I want to let you know that I'll be posting the live stream of this to my newsletter, and I believe Simon and Ben will get copies as well that they can post to
I
theirs.
think so, yeah.
And he also asks about recommendations for serial fiction. And for that, I'm going to refer you to Simon. He's written what is the definitive guide for the best practices for writing serial fiction. And I'm sure that he can provide a link to that whenever he sends out the newsletter. But
cool.
And I will
Thanks,
as well.
I've certainly written a lot about it.
I will defer to you then.
And done several interviews for it as well. But Ben, I appreciate you being on. Thank you for your time and
Yeah,
for
thanks for
all of
hanging
your
out.
great answers. It was great talking to you.
Thanks everyone for coming along and listening to us witter.
Thank you guys for watching.